So for our panel now, so how can you support? You have been listening very closely. We need your view. Very happy to have you here. Liliane Volozinskis, Director for Social Affairs and Training Policy at the European Association of Craft, Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. Very warm welcome. Please. Mara Brugia, the Acting Director of CEDEFOP. Please come to the stage. Very good to have you here. And with us, Thibaut Weber from France, Confederal Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation. Yeah, there you are. Welcome to you. You can choose out of 3. Very good. And Cesare, that's correct. Cesare Onestini, Director of the UHNC, European Trading Foundation, ETF. Thanks for being with us. Joao Santos, Deputy Head of Unit in the DG for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. Very good to have you here. I've seen you taking notes from the previous panel. The first question for you is the same as the other panel. Got your vision, your scenario. Thibaut, would you like to start, please? Your introductory comment, European cooperation in VET post-2020. What is needed? What is your vision in an ideal world?
Okay, I will mention 3 important elements for us. The first one is social dialogue. I mean, the involvement of employers and workers' representatives together with their trade unions to shape VET policies, training policies everywhere, including at the workplace level, is very important. We have heard our colleague this morning, sorry, I don't remember your name, Verena Spitz. She explained how the role of a works council could be and how important it is for training policies to be discussed as a strategic part of the company policy. So it's not only about a technical way to shape training policies, like together with the unions and to respect the national law on workers' participation, is to make sure that there is a broad ownership on training policies. So to make sure that trade unions are not there only to discuss the compensation and linked to layoff at the end of the process, but before, to make sure that when there is a discussion about the challenges linked to the future forecast on employment and skills, there is a real ownership. And it's a key element, in particular when we discuss about concrete access to training for low-skilled workers, in particular. How to make sure that unions can play a role, and we know we can improve our activities here in that respect, to make sure that our people, our members, including the low skills, are encouraged by us to access training.
Not only the members.
Not only the members, of course, but the members also, but not only.
Okay.
Like companies, they don't defend only their members. I don't think so. All of them, okay. So, and the second, sorry, I'm already long. The other important element is, okay, access to training is the working on an enabling conditional environment for both companies and workers, but to make sure that every learner, every worker in Europe can have access to training. It is important for us to maybe work in the future on a European principle of a right to training, linked to the first principle of the European Pillar of Social Rights. I remember you should remind the European Pillar of Social Rights. The first principle is about access to training. Why not working on a European principle of the right to training to make sure that we tackle the 2 aspects of inequalities linked to training? The first one is inequalities in terms of access if you are a worker in a big company or in a small company, or inequalities for European citizens if you are in a country where there is a well-established VET system, and other citizens who are only depending of the good willing of the employer at the end, in countries where the VET system is not developed like in other countries.
Yeah. Okay.
That's it for now.
Thanks for now. Liliane, would you please continue your vision, cooperation in VET on 2020?
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank Thibaut Weber from ETUC, because we are both European social partners and therefore we work closely together. I mean, representing employers, there are large and small businesses. Even if I represent UAPME as such, I would like to say that for employers, our key issue is really competencies and skills. And we heard during this 1.5 days the issue of the speed of change and the need for digital skills. What I would like to add there is not only digital skills. We heard very clearly we need broader skills and we need higher skills as well. And therefore, for us as employers, we would like to further develop higher VET. We really see a need to further develop higher VET. My second point is about VET. VET is certainly the perfect response to these challenges, but there we need stronger partnership. When I speak stronger partnership, it's really the role of social partners at system level, the role of business organizations to be closely involved, because what we are missing most is really that learning outcomes are in line with labor market needs. This is really what we need, learning outcomes in line with labor market needs in an evolving dimension. And this is for us a key issue, and this is why, Thibaut, when you speak about access to training, we see as a third element a better balance between initial VET and continuous VET. And it's certainly one of the key challenges for us for the future. And we don't speak a right to training because there is a diversity of systems at national level, but access to further training, to lifelong learning is absolutely key for employers if we want really to remain competitive as businesses, invest in innovation and create jobs. Because at the end of the day, what we want to have in Europe is really more jobs for all. Yeah. And to remain competitive in a globalized world. And this is really our key challenge.
And less mismatches, as you mentioned.
Of course, less mismatches. We heard about skills mismatches, skills gaps, and also more and more labor shortages. Let's be realistic. We have an aging population, and therefore we have less and less young people entering the labor market. We need to upskill, reskill really adult learners. Yeah. And this is for us a key issue. And representing SMEs, it's even more a challenge for small businesses because we know the difficulties, as you said, big and large and small businesses. And not only workers, also entrepreneurs themselves should be upskilled and reskilled.
Okay, this was a message to Gunilla. Are you still there? Yes, you're still there. Mara, from the CEDEFOP's acting director's perspective, your vision.
Yeah, well, when it comes to European cooperation post-2020, I think that, first of all, we need to keep the positive spin. And from our perspective, cooperation in VET will become even more significant in future. All, for example, the comparative analysis, policy analysis, and the work that we're doing at CEDEFOP show clearly that the next decade will be crucial for VET, let's say, to reconsider its role. And we must do this all together, and not in isolation, but within a much broader perspective and framework. For example, the developments that we see in our labor markets, in our economies and in our society, let's say, point to a clear need for countries to rethink how VET is designed, or to rethink and readjust the actual content of their VET programs, and also to rethink perhaps the way these VET programs are actually delivered, and most of all, rethink the way VET institutions are governed and how they interact, let's say, within the overall world of education and training. And I mean, we all know the common challenges we are facing, and these are not new. I mean, digitalization, increasing inequalities, disparities, for example, at regional level. But what is new is, as we discussed already, is the pace of change and the actual quite high degree of uncertainty surrounding these changes. And then when it comes to the implications for VET, we should, I think, bear in mind the fact that the changes are not the future, but changes are already taking place. We can already see them, and they are already challenging some of the, let's say, of the pillars on which our VET systems are built, yeah? For example, if today we ask the question, a very basic question, what is employment? I mean, this would come out as a very naive question, but it's not at all a naive question, because if we consider that non-standard jobs are likely to become the norm, and so, I mean, the very meaning and the concept of employment is changing, and with it also the concept of learning. You see, what is learning, how and where it actually takes place. For example, with the platform economy, the concept of workplace is fundamentally changing, because it is no longer necessarily the place offered by the employers. Or, for example, what is working time when we work across borders or under extremely flexible working arrangements. So these are all very fundamental questions which have important implications for the role of education and training, and especially VET in the future. So if we are to address all these fundamental changes, I mean, some of them, of course, we need to do this all together, and let's say European cooperation has a very high added value, and to further increase its added value, it would be important from our perspective that roles and responsibilities of the various actors playing a role at European level are perhaps a little bit better defined, so that we can ensure synergies and avoid, as far as possible, overlap.
Thanks. Do you expect upcoming discussions about?
Sorry?
Do you expect upcoming discussions about the unconditional base income without any strings?
Sorry, I don't hear you. I don't know for which
I'm sorry.
reason. I cannot hear you.
Do you expect
Yeah.
in this forthcoming 10 years, 2020 to 2030, because you ask a question, what is employment? So
Yeah.
do you expect discussions on unconditional base income without any strings? So since we might,
okay.
10 years from now, not talk about this and that job anymore, and this
Well,
and that profession.
Yeah.
So how rapid do you expect to change in the environment?
Well, I do not have a crystal ball, and so I cannot really answer your question. But for sure, I mean, I would expect that this would be part of the debate at European level, because this is a very fundamental question, which is more generally linked also to the broader debate about digitalization, the platform economy, you see the so-called third workers, yeah? So definitely there will be discussions, but I'm not able to tell you which will be the outcomes of these discussions
Okay.
at this moment, yeah.
Thank you very much for answering. Cesare, the ETF and the crucial decade, as Mara said. What is your vision?
The European
Post
Training
2020.
Foundation, thanks. The European Training Foundation, as you know, works outside of the European Union, and we work on education and training with countries which are outside, mainly in the neighborhood, but also further afield. And I think when I take that perspective, the perspective of our everyday work, I see 3 points that maybe can also help us think about the future. First of all is the question of how much we spend time discussing amongst ourselves and agreeing amongst ourselves. But when you step out, you see that the perspective changes very quickly. And I think we should make, in our reflection, we should make a more conscious effort to bring this element into the rooms, and rooms like this. We need to hear these voices. And I say this not because we need to teach or give lessons, but because we need to listen, because I think the world is changing fast, not just in Europe, but very much so everywhere around us. And in fact, in some of the countries we work with, we see that some things are changing even faster because the needs are so much more urgent. So when you go to some of the countries we work with, the actual needs in the countries are so pressing that they have to come up with solutions at a much faster pace. So I think it's in our interest to keep that door very much open. And if I think of the future European cooperation, I think European cooperation is the nucleus, but we really need to open it up a bit more. Secondly, when you compare the discussions we have here with the discussions we have with countries around, you are struck by the question of governance. And how much governance, and by governance I mean the role of ministries, the role of social partners, the role of providers, how that really affects the quality of what you deliver. And within the European Union we have systems of governance which are different but comparable to some extent. As soon as you go out, you see that as soon as you lose some of the pieces, it becomes much more tricky how you enforce. So I think we need to bear that in mind and see also that some of the things we say all the time, like we all agree lifelong learning is important. And then we all go back and we all go back to our different ministries, our different agencies, and each one does a little bit of it. And we seem to think that it's enough to say lifelong learning is important, but we don't actually do it. When we go to third countries, we actually sit down with them and we start looking at governance and giving them advice that obviously we are not allowed to give to European member states because we are autonomous or so. But this reflection has to start and come up, maybe in a dialectical, comparative way. And lastly, I was struck by the question of reality check in the previous panel. Well, when you go out, the reality check is that not everybody is going to be substituted by algorithms, and not everybody is going to be working in digital or so. So I think it's important in the reality check that we also look very much at the 70% of the youngsters now that are not going to go immediately into these kind of professions, and therefore need to be equipped for that first job, for that first entry, or need, for continuous work, for workers to be re-equipped to actually continue and find the next profession. So I think the reality check, which we focused very much about the new technologies in the future, also needs to be brought back into, well, what is the reality of these countries that we work with?
Thank you very much, Joao. What should be now our focus post-2020 when you talk about cooperation?
Thank you. I think that we all facing common challenges. I mean, if we look at climate change, if we look at digitalization, Industry 4.0, these are all challenges that require a common response. I mean, they are global challenges, not only these very big megatrends, but also at the very local level. What you see is that increasingly throughout Europe, because of migration issues, refugees, increased mobility within the European Union. I was speaking with a teacher recently, and they were telling me that in Belgium, that teacher had a class of 23 people and 20 different nationalities. And some of them didn't even speak any French or Dutch at all. So you've got this complexity, not only of global challenges, but also very micro local issues. And I think nobody has a complete solution on how to address this. I think nobody can say, I have the solution, Austria is the best model. I think nobody can do it. And you see this exactly because, Finland, for example, now is currently going through a tremendous reform of their VET system. Even the Germans and the Austrians, which are considered as a reference of the very best we have in Europe, are themselves rethinking of how can they incorporate these issues of digitalization, Industry 4.0. And I think, to a certain extent, the beauty of Europe is giving us opportunity to all come together, recognizing that we have something to learn from each other. And us bringing the VET researchers, the VET providers, the trade unions, the companies, be it big or small, also supported by evidence, the work we do with CEDEFOP, the ETF, the OECD, the JRC. So bringing all this intelligence together, recognizing that none of us has the solution for the problem, but wanting to reach out, to share, to understand how the others are doing it. What are the concerns of the trade unions? What are the concerns of companies? And how can we bring this together? And what we are doing in Europe is precisely doing this, reaching out, bringing all the intelligence that is out there together, agreeing, first of all, on what are the big issues that we should all be working on, and then through financing and through peer learning, and I've heard that throughout this conference, this issue of peer learning, sharing experience has been very valued by everyone in general. So by doing this, and also providing the financial mechanisms that allow the member states to deliver on this and to work together, and that's, I would say, our added value. And independent of now telling you that in the future we're going to look at this or that aspect, I think this principle of getting together, learning from each other, of good and bad experience, because sometimes a bad experience in one country can be a lesson for the others not to repeat. But this idea of having this sharing of experience, I would say, is the biggest added value that we bring to the process.
Thank you very much. Your unit is also responsible for Erasmus Plus, which was all of the panelists from the previous panel said this is a real success story. You would not disagree, I think. What other corporations did prove successful, in your opinion?
Well, if you look, I mean, there are a lot of things that I could say on the Copenhagen process and the benefits it has brought, especially in giving attention to work-based learning, to apprenticeships and so on. But if I just concentrate on Erasmus+, I mean, Erasmus+, some people over here, of course, you all know that Erasmus+ is supporting very much VET reforms, mobility of VET learners. I can tell you that this year we will be supporting something like 180,000 learners, as well as teachers and trainers in mobility in Europe. So going from one country to the other. This in itself, it's a tremendous achievement, because if you think of it, it's not only about sending someone somewhere else. The VET center that is in Austria, that gets in contact with a Spanish VET center or Spanish company, they have to sit down together, because this person is not going there just for tourism. They're going there to learn something. You have to agree on the learning outcomes. You've got to agree on the way that the assessment will be done. And this is a way of bringing people together in Europe, you know, organizations together to work, to see how are you doing it? Can I send my learner to your place? And will they learn what they were expected to learn in my place with added portfolio of skills, of course, but that's the idea. So this cooperation is extremely important. Just on Erasmus, to tell you that not only, as you said, rightly so, that Erasmus has been very successful in the current programming period, we're trying to make it even more successful in the future. And just to give you, I think most of you already know it, but in the current programming period, we were aiming to have in mobility in VET around 650,000 people. In the next programming period, the Commission, in a proposal made very recently, we're aiming to have almost 2 million people in VET in mobility, so both teachers and trainers as well as learners. But Erasmus, just to finalize, Erasmus is not only about mobility. In Erasmus Plus, not only the strategic partnerships allows us to link very clearly what are policy priorities. For example, the 5 policy priorities we had in Riga that we agreed all in Riga to work on, then we have them translated into the strategic partnership priorities, which allow the financing and member states to get together and organizations to get together and work on these priorities. And it also allows us, and that's another important element of Erasmus+, to experiment and to provide some innovative issues on which the countries can work on. I can give you an example of the joint qualifications that is, you know, we're all talking about, you know, the challenges we have in the automotive sector in Germany or Spain or Italy are very common. And what we're trying to do is not telling the member states that they should have this or that in the curricula, because first of all, we don't know what it should be, and second, we shouldn't be doing it, but basically telling the member states, look, if you want to work together in addressing certain challenges, in looking at the future, what will be occupational profiles of the future? How can these then be translated into education qualifications? We have the money to support you. So without telling what should be done, we're basically sending signals. If you want to work on this, and in fact, if we look at the joint qualification call we had last year, it was overwhelming, the demand that we had, because we only had funding for about 15 projects, and we had more than 60 projects covering 26 member states that wanted to work on this. But this is just an example of how, for example, funding is providing support for policy developments in VET in Europe.
Thank you very much. We have a collection of cooperations that did prove successful from panel one. Do you want to add on that? Is there anything that was not mentioned yet?
Perhaps, I mean, one comment from CEDEFOP's perspective. I mean, we have been analyzing the progress that countries have been made towards, let's say, the commonly agreed policy priorities since the very beginning of the Copenhagen process, and together with the ETF, of course, and in close cooperation with the European Commission. And what we can safely say is that the process of the European cooperation on VET has really, let's say, stimulated, has really encouraged policy reform, yeah, at national level, and has helped and encouraged countries to keep VET as a priority in their national agenda, but it's also helped countries for which VET was not, let's say, that high priority, let's say, to keep it again in their national policy agenda. And I think this is very important. And one last comment on this, I think that what else has made this cooperation successful in our view has been the actual commitment and ownership of national authorities, especially of the ministers, of director generals for vocational education and training, of social partners, because especially in the first 10 years of this cooperation, I mean, of the Copenhagen process, really European cooperation has been, let's say, a sort of hub, yeah? And I think that commitment and ownership are two very important factors on which we should continue building European cooperation also in the future.
Thibaut?
On the positive side, I think we made huge progress on apprenticeship with the European Islands on apprenticeship, also with the new EU framework on quality and effective apprenticeship. This is exactly where Europe can play a role as a quality standard, where, you know, like Euro NCAP for car security, or where Europe is seen as a quality label, you know. We need to improve it because, I mean, there are many countries, or nearly all the countries says that apprenticeship should increase its prestige to attract more young people, and having a strong European strategy, making apprenticeship something very European will be definitely be helpful to attract young people to apprenticeship.
May I take over?
Yes, please.
I would like really to insist on the value of VET. I think it was undervalued until we had the economic crisis. Don't forget 2008. And there we discovered suddenly a huge level of youth unemployment. And we saw that countries with very good VET systems, in particular work-based learning, had a better achievement. And this is all about the value of VET, work-based learning, for employability of young people, to really play a key role as a transition from really school to work. And this is based on that, unfortunately, due to the economic crisis, VET has been much more valued, and we work together as social partners, trade unions, and employers on the other side. It was a bottom-up approach to reach this European framework for quality and also effective apprenticeship. Because for employers, we talked about quality, but we talked also about cost-effectiveness of apprenticeship. Because employers need to have a return really on investment. It's a real investment, and they have to find their way. And this is why we closely work together, and we propose it to the Advisory Committee on Vocational Training, and finally it has been adopted at European level, and for us it's really a great success. We can really say that the process in itself. Another issue is really EQF and learning outcomes. For us, this has been really the big change. Defining all qualifications into know-how, competencies, and really learning outcomes. And we would like to go further, because I remember the words of Minister Fassmann. He said we should have more trust among member states about their qualifications to facilitate mobility and recognition. Yeah. And we as well we would like to go further on the EQF and to really deepen this notion of learning outcomes. And if I could say something for the future, I really take this opportunity. We have a dream about ARQA-VET because we have the Bologna process, and we would like to have something similar for ARQA-VET, but in the field really of vocational training. And as you asked me, we work together with our Austrian colleagues IBV, but also German, French, Belgium, and Greek partners to develop quality assurance in ARQA-VET. And I would like really to recommend you to see really the beginning of our work. It's only a first step towards really for 2030 having a similar system of Bologna for academic education, but a similar system we could call it Copenhagen system.
Okay.
This would be fantastic for really a VET systems. For us, this would be really parity of esteem and really to put VET at the right level as academic education.
Thank you.
If I can just add a word and support what Mara was saying about the importance of monitoring and what that has given us. First of all, monitoring has shown the importance of the process also for our countries, our partner countries, because being able to compare and being part of a wider perspective, and I think the European perspective is essential, is important. Secondly, the monitoring has created, if it was not there before, the awareness of the importance of evidence. And in fact, the importance of evidence for some of these discussions, and has identified some big gaps in the evidence that we have, and they need to invest a little bit more of our resources in finding ways of capturing this data so that we can bring it into the policy discussion, and these discussions can go towards more concrete reforms. And in this sense, I see also for the future that we're looking more and more carefully at the whole question of funding and how the funding is behind many of the discussions that we have, and that is something that we'll have to bring into focus more in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We agree? Yeah, okay. Do we have Slido questions? Which I could pass on. Yeah, again, you cannot really see it. Okay. What is the future of ARQA-VET and EC-VET from the point of view of the Commission? Joao, I think this one's for you.
Good. Any other easy questions? You can put them up. No, just to tell you that, you know, ARQA-VET and ARQA-VET have been there since 2009. And, you know, the way that the member states have taken them on board varies a lot. I can tell that, for example, Finland. Take Finland. And Finland is a good example because their system is quite well developed. If you look at PISA, if you look at PIAC, they usually perform extremely well. And Finland is an example of a country that has taken these recommendations quite seriously. If you look at the way they've structured their vocational system, it's all on modules, and you know, it follows the principles of ARQA-VET. However, they don't publicize it as being ARQA-VET compliant or ARQA-VET compliant. That doesn't, and we really don't care, to be honest. It's not that we are trying to get, you know, medals of, we are doing this because the Commission came up with a proposal some years ago. As long as in the end, the principles that are behind them are implemented. And I think there's a general move throughout Europe to have this concept of modularization of the qualifications being taken on board, because it's the easiest way to adapt to rapid changes in the occupational profiles, in the skills, and so on. So, but to say, it's not to say that ARQA-VET and ARQA-VET is working perfectly. Of course not. We've had an external evaluation a few years ago that identified major issues on these two tools. And just to tell that we are currently conducting a study that goes beyond simply looking at ARQA-VET and ARQA-VET. And the Austrian presidency has been quite insistent on this, that we should look at how the VET tools fit with the wider context of what is happening with ECTS, what is happening on quality in higher education, what is happening with Europass, with EQF. And the tools, the VET tools shouldn't be seen in isolation. They should be seen in this wider context. Are they still fit for purpose? When they were conceived, they had a certain purpose. 10 years after, with everything that has happened around, are they still fit for purpose? This is a very pertinent question. I don't have the exact solution to give you right now. That's precisely why we have a study going on. We hope by the end of this year we'll have the results of the study, and these results will feed in to the reflection that we are having on in what direction we should be going post-2020. And we're going to provide these conclusions to the governance bodies of VET in Europe, so to the ACVT, to the Advisory Committee for Vocational Training, to the Directors General for Vocational Training, and the future policy on VET will take these elements into consideration. Just like we're looking at funding, how we should better use funding, link it with policy priorities, how we should cooperate at the European level in setting the priorities, how should we use these tools. But just to tell you that, I mean, I don't have a concrete answer saying we're going to do this or that in ARQA-VET. What I'm saying is that we're taking stock of what has been the positive developments, and I gave you the example of Finland, but there are many others that have taken on board these principles. We're taking stock of what happened. We're trying to make sure we are clear on what are the handicaps or the weaknesses of these tools, looking at how they fit in the wider context, and linking them with what is our reflection on the future of VET. So this is basically the approach we are taking forward.
The next one would be, do you think that we can avoid recognition procedures in the future? How to link the VET systems of each member state to avoid or to simplify recognition process? Is it avoidable in the future?
I don't want to monopolize this, so if anyone wants to take the question, I'm happy. Just to tell you on this issue, you know, recognition is a complex phenomena, because recognition doesn't just happen because there's someone in Brussels that comes up with a requirement that it happens. It has to be based on trust, on transparency, and on sharing of experiences. So on inequality, of course. But what we are doing, you might be aware that the Commission quite recently adopted a proposal for a Council recommendation on recognition. The idea here is not to get into the details of how the qualifications should be done, but to make sure that if, for example, in Austria, it's a matter of trust, and that's why this initial thing that I told you about transparency, trust, and quality are underpinning what will happen in the future. But I think that this is more or less intuitive. We all work in the European Union. I mean, we all are members of the VET context in which we are working. Why shouldn't a learner that finishes a qualification in Austria, that with that VET qualification would have access to higher education in Austria, why shouldn't that person, when they move to Germany or when they move to France, not have the same right? If in Austria it is possible, why shouldn't they have the same right to have access to higher education in France or in Germany? It doesn't make sense, unless there's a clear argument that what they come up with is of no quality, but the principle that we have to trust each other. If the Spanish authorities decided that someone that has a VET qualification can go into the higher education system, we should have a system of trust that then, if that person is capable, has the qualification to have access to higher education in one country, it should have in the other. This does not mean, because you know that the universities are autonomous, they can have then access conditions. Because, for example, if I take my country, my daughter has just finished medical studies in Portugal. If she had a VET qualification in mechatronics, she couldn't go into a higher education, not even in Portugal, because it requires that you have certain subjects like biology, mathematics, and so on. And of course, the university in every country have the right to determine their access conditions. But the possibility of applying to, if it is possible in one country, should be possible in any other country. But this is the Commission proposal. We'll see how the member states accept it. There will be a discussion, and the Austrian presidency is going to take this on board in their responsibilities in conducting European policy in the next 6 months. But this is the principle that I wanted to put forward, that the Commission has just adopted recently, and this is, I simplified it quite a lot, but this is the thinking behind it, that if it gives access in one country to further education, it should give in all the others.
Well, do you see the SCO in the VET framework of the future? Who is this going to? Why do you see ESCO in the VET framework of the future? If I say ESCO, it's better, I just heard. Since I'm not an expert, I got this one wrong. I'm very sorry. It's again for you, right?
Oh my God, you guys will be tired of me by the end. So you'll be looking at the next conference. Joao Santos is going there. I will not go for sure. I'm tired of him. Well, let me try to be very short on this. I mean, ESCO is not finalized, as you know. There are some people in the room that are better qualified probably to talk about ESCO than me. But ESCO, basically what it's trying to do is to, typify and identify what are occupation profiles, then looking at, well, that part has not been established yet, but looking what are qualification profiles, and then with this help us also address issues like mismatch of skills, trying to see how the qualification profiles and what are the skills being given by the education sector fit with what are the occupational skills that are needed. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but this is basically the idea. But if you think of it, then this kind of work that is being done can be extremely useful for public employment services, for people looking or registering for a job, because they will be, through ESCO and through the kind of taxonomy that is provided by ESCO, say what are the skills they have, and the employer that is looking for someone with those skills will be capable of easily identifying whether that person has those skills or not. This is just an example. When you put your CV in EURES or any other database, this ESCO will give you a way of increasing the transparency of both what businesses are looking for, what people have as qualifications they brought from the education system, or even gained informally throughout their life. But this is basically how it would be. But I'm sure that there are people in the audience that know much better than me. If you'd like to answer me and give me a help, please do so.
Thank you very much for your final remarks. Since again we are running out of time. Your outlook 2020 to 2030, what support can be expected from geo-level policy? Liliane, would you like to start, please?
Yes, perhaps I would like to recall one very important and for us crucial story. Okay. When young people are coming out of secondary school, they should all be equipped with solid basic skills, because it's one of the main challenges when we speak about VET, and we speak about VET excellence and inclusion at the same time. Many employers are facing really a key issue, the lack of basic skills of young people for becoming apprentice or even working in a company. And this should be really something to be solved by even before 2030. My second issue is really, and there I would very much join the member states, peer learning, bench learning, really mutual exchange, mutual practices, because we don't need top-down approach, but much more bottom-up approach if we want to reach the ground level. And when we are talking about reality check today, we heard it from the young people, from employers, from business organizations, really to foster this bottom-up approach. And last but not least, financing, because it's really the means for making progress. And I would like to really to conclude with that. We have at European level what we call the European semester, which is really what kind of reforms should be undertaken in member states who have a better convergence. And the most numerous country-specific recommendations are on modernizing education and training systems. And member states should be strongly supported with the next MFF multi-financial framework, particularly in the field of ESF, but also Erasmus and other tools like EU Invest, in order really to fully implement these country-specific recommendations.
Thank you very much, Thibaut. The appropriate support in this crucial decade.
No, very briefly on ESCO, just to say that it is important for us to talk the same language in terms of qualification and competences. We are not there yet with the tool, but behind, I mean, all the technicalities that appears when we talk about ESCO, it is very important as one brick in the wall of recognition and the space of European qualification for VET. ESCO is important, but there is work going on. On the future of VET, I mean, more than 20 years ago, member states, head of states, ministers launched the Bologna process. It was higher education, EU higher education, prestige. In Göteborg, for the proclamation of the social pillar, they launched the education area. Again, education is really important. Now it should be the turn of VET. And sometimes we hear, I mean, there are many colleagues from member states or employers, and I've also faced that as well in the trade union movement, for sure. We hear that, you know, in VET, respect national systems, and come on, make it European. But for that, we need political will. So we should push our ministries, our head of states to make sure it is a priority and that VET becomes really a European strategy in the future.
Thank you very much. Cesare.
Well, adding just a couple of words to this. One is that as we look forward, as we look at 2030, there is also a demographic imperative. We need to somehow also from the VET sector send messages about what is needed and what will be the implications of what we see as trends in our own countries, in our own society. So I think these voices need to be heard because, as we heard also from the Austrian colleagues this morning, VET is part of the solution many times, and we need to make that seen and appreciated. Secondly, I think coming back to the question of why don't we have a Bologna process in VET, well, it's because I think universities have much more autonomy to move, so we need to first work, I think, on that question, on the question of the autonomy of the systems to empower our systems to move, because anything which is centralized and top-down will not have the same impact. So I think the goal is there. I think we need to find ways to get there, and I think what the Commission is doing now with the increased mobility, that is a trigger. As we know, also the Bologna process was the result of the increasing mobility, the pressure that builds up, the need to give answers to students and teachers who find themselves coming back and asking for recognition of what they have done. So I think we need to be ready, and we need to harness that in order to make sure that in 30 years we will have this more transparent, more open and permeable system at European level.
Thank you very much. Joao, the outlook.
You know, yesterday there was someone that said that Darwin, when discussing evolution, said that the species that survives is not the most intelligent, it's not the strongest, it's the one that is capable of adapting to change. And I think that taking a little bit of what Bika also said this morning, it's important that we don't focus on doing reforms every 5 years or every 10 years, having sort of burst of reforms, but really we prepare the VET systems for the future that will be capable of permanently being attentive to what are the challenges and adapting to change. So if we take this lesson from Darwin, if you want. So adapting to change is key. It's not being the strongest, it's not being the most intelligent, the capacity to adapt to change. And I think that's the trick that we have to do for VET. And if I may just say so, Dana has already elaborated on it during her presentation, but I think there are these 5 elements that should sort of guide what we want. I will not get into detail, but this issue of remembering that VET is not only about excellence, but also about inclusion. There are many people that don't fit in the system for some reason, that need a response. We have to make sure that we have cohesive societies, and VET has traditionally been a solution for these people. We have to continue to do so. We have to work on excellence as well, for innovation, for digitalization, to confront the challenges. So inclusion and excellence are fundamental. We have to build VET systems that are flexible and responsive to what happens outside on a permanent basis, not every 5 years or not every 10 years. We have to focus on the issue of efficiency and financing of a VET and the continuous learning approach, because the world is changing. Personal responsibilities for also financing. We cannot expect the state to pay everything throughout our lives. We have responsibilities ourselves. The companies themselves have responsibilities for the continuous training of the people. So we've got to see what is this cost-sharing mechanisms for the future. And the last element I would mention is this understanding that although in Europe we might know a lot, we don't know everything, and we have to be open to what happens in Australia, in China, in Canada, and the US. And this international dimension of European cooperation in VET is extremely important. So I think if we focus on these 5 elements, we'll be capable of building flexible systems that are adaptable to change and will allow us to evolve in the future.
Thank you very much, Mara. How can you level policy create added value, your outlook?
Well, I mean, perhaps 2 comments. First of all, I think that it's very important that we continue to further strengthen, let's say, this platform for systematic and long-term cooperation and collaboration between member states, European social partners, and other actors, because this has been a very big achievement, and our experience and the evidence that we have confirms that durable solutions can only evolve through cooperation and mutual learning. As Joao was saying before, yes, challenges are similar, and so also priorities can be joined. Yes, indeed, but I would define, let's say, the future European cooperation process as a sort of, let's say, parallel convergence, meaning that, let's say, it's a like of an oxymoron to say that, of course, it's very important to establish, let's say, broadly common policy priorities at European level, because this is really a key advantage. But then, I mean, it's also important that member states are left, let's say, the necessary degree of flexibility for them to, let's say, decide which is the best policy mix through which they would, let's say, implement successfully the broadly agreed policy priorities at European level. And from the perspective of CEDEFOP, we are fully committed to continue supporting the success of European cooperation in that, in the future, I mean, through facilitating policy learning and through continuing providing the qualitative and quantitative evidence which is so necessary to inform shaping and implementation of VET policies.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for your great commitment, for your encouraging outlook. Big applause for you.